The billionaire walked in to destroy me. He didn't knock, he didn't wait. He walked through my front door like he already owned the floor beneath his shoes, 3 men in suits behind him. And the first thing he said to me, in front of my morning customers, was that my bakery would not exist by the end of the year. I want you to understand something before I tell you what happened next. I did not build this bakery out of luck. I built it out of flour and fire and years where I didn't know if I would make rent. So when a man worth more money than I could count looked at me like I was an obstacle on a spreadsheet, I did not shrink. I looked back at him the same way my grandmother taught me to look at anyone who thought my worth was negotiable. My name doesn't matter for this story. What matters is the corner where my bakery sat, in a neighborhood that raised me, in a city that had slowly forgotten what it meant to know your neighbors. My bakery was small, 12 tables, a counter my father built with his own hands before he passed, a recipe for cinnamon bread that came from my grandmother's kitchen in Lagos, carried across an ocean, kept alive through my hands. For 10 years, that bakery was mine, not because a bank owned it, not because I inherited it, but because I built it with the sweat that comes before sunrise, alone, when nobody else believed a black woman with no investors and no connections could turn flour into something a neighborhood would love. And then he came, a man who had built towers out of glass and steel across half the country, who saw my corner not as a home, but as a location. He wanted to build another glass tower where my bakery stood, and when I said no, when I told him this land was not for sale, he decided the fastest way to take it from me was to take my name first. He started small. Health inspectors showed up twice in 1 week, sent by a call his people made, using influence I didn't understand yet. Reporters he knew were fed a story that my bakery had unsanitary conditions, unlicensed staff, expired permits. None of it was true, but truth moves slower than money, and by the time I could prove otherwise, half my regular customers had stopped coming. I remember standing behind my counter that week, watching people who had eaten my bread every Saturday for years walk past my window without looking in. I remember thinking that a man who had never once touched flour in his life was trying to erase everything I had built with my hands. But my grandmother used to say that a fire built slow burns longer than one built fast, and I did not build my bakery fast. So when he thought he could burn it down in a week, he underestimated exactly how deep my roots went. I started fighting back the only way I knew, with proof, with patience, with the people who actually knew me. I opened my books to the city. I let health inspectors from an independent agency come through my kitchen with cameras rolling, showing every certification, every clean surface, every properly stored ingredient. I asked my customers, the ones who had known me for years, to speak for themselves instead of letting a stranger's money speak for them. It worked, slowly. The false health violations were dismissed publicly with an apology from the city that made the local news. But that wasn't enough for him. When lies didn't work, he tried something colder. He sent his assistant to offer me money, not to buy my bakery, but to buy my silence, my agreement to relocate quietly so his development could proceed without a public fight. I looked that assistant in the eye and told her that some things are not for sale, no matter how many zeros are on the check. She left without an answer, but I could see something in her face I didn't expect. Not disgust with me, disgust with him. That should have been the end of that chapter, but then something happened that neither of us expected. A local journalist, digging into the story of the billionaire versus the baker, uncovered something buried far beneath his glass towers and press releases. Decades earlier, before the empire, before the money, his own family had lived 2 blocks from where my bakery stood. His mother had worked in a small shop not unlike mine, in the very neighborhood he was now trying to erase until it was bulldozed by a different developer, back when his family had no power to stop it. He had spent his whole life building towers so that no one could ever do to him what was done to his mother, and now, without realizing it, he had become the very thing he swore he would destroy. When that story broke, it did something money couldn't buy. It turned public opinion entirely against him. Protesters gathered outside his development office. His own board members questioned the ethics of the project. For the first time in years, a man used to controlling every outcome was watching a situation spiral in a direction his money couldn't fix. I won't pretend I felt sorry for him at first. I had spent weeks defending my name, my staff's jobs, my grandmother's recipe, while he sat in an office deciding my life was worth less than his.
Skyline. But something changed the day he showed up at my bakery again. Not with lawyers, not with suits, but alone. He sat down at one of my 12 tables, the same tables where children did homework after school and old men played chess on Sunday mornings. And he asked if he could order a coffee like anyone else. I almost said no, but my grandmother also used to say that dignity means treating people the way they deserve, not the way they've treated you. I served him a coffee and a slice of the cinnamon bread that had made my bakery known throughout the neighborhood. He ate in silence for a long moment, and then he said something I never expected to hear from a man like him. He told me that he hadn't set foot in a place like this since he was a boy, since before his mother's shop was torn down to build something colder in its place. He told me that somewhere between his first million and his 100th, he had convinced himself that build up meant knock down, that success meant erasing anything that stood in the way of something bigger. He told me he had spent so long trying to become untouchable that he had forgotten what it felt like to be somewhere he actually belonged. I didn't forgive him in that moment. Forgiveness isn't something you hand out because someone finally noticed the damage they caused. But I did tell him something true, that the neighborhood he was trying to erase was the same neighborhood that had once given his own mother a place to stand on her own 2 feet, and that maybe if he wanted to build something worth being remembered for, he should start by protecting places like this one instead of flattening them. He didn't argue, he didn't try to buy his way into a better ending. For the first time since he had walked into my life, he simply listened. Weeks later, the development plans changed. Not because I asked him to change them, and not because guilt alone rewired a man like that overnight, but because the public pressure, the truth about his family's history, and perhaps some quiet part of himself he had buried for decades, all collided at once. He withdrew his proposal to build on my corner entirely. He didn't do it publicly for credit. He did it quietly, the way people do when they're not trying to look good, but trying to be good. I kept my bakery. My 12 tables stayed exactly where they were. My father's counter stayed exactly where he built it. My grandmother's recipe kept feeding a neighborhood that had once again learned to trust that some things aren't for sale. As for him, he started coming back, not as a billionaire negotiating power, not as a man trying to prove a point, but as a regular customer sitting quietly in the corner with his coffee and his cinnamon bread, watching a neighborhood live the kind of life his money had never been able to buy him. I still don't know everything about where his story goes from here, but I know this. The man who once tried to erase my name from a corner of this city is the same man who now waits patiently in line behind school teachers and grandmothers just to sit in a bakery he once tried to destroy. If there's a lesson in this story, it's not about revenge, and it's not about billionaires learning to be kind. It's about knowing your own worth so completely that even the most powerful person in the room cannot convince you otherwise. It's about understanding that some things, a recipe, a community, a name earned through your own hands, are worth more than any amount of money someone can offer to take them from you. Because in the end, he didn't come back to buy my bakery. He came back because for the first time in his life,
He finally found somewhere he wanted to belong.